Faith sat on the windowsill and watched the raindrops dripping down the glass. It was her favourite place in the apartment, though not exactly comfortable. Things were very different in the apartment that could have been her home if she'd managed to talk her husband into buying it. She chose that apartment because of the windowsills, unusually wide, wooden, more like countertops than those narrow plastic strips under windows where even flower pots teeter precariously. Since childhood, a wide windowsill where one could sit comfortably had symbolised coziness for Faith. In her dreams, she pictured herself beautiful and stylish, reclining against two contrasting cushions, languidly gazing out the window with a steaming mug of coffee. Perhaps these persistent fantasies came from a scene in fashion magazines or a movie, but she desperately wanted such a windowsill. When she saw this apartment, it was love at first sight, bright, spacious, with a beautiful city view, and, oh wonder, those coveted windowsills that seemed to beckon her. But her husband Jack took his time, wandering from room to room, mumbling to himself, literally sniffing every corner while picking at wallpaper edges and grimacing. "Well, I don't know," he said at last. "There's a lot of, how should I put it, unnecessary things." "For instance?" Faith asked, surprised. "Well, for example, these windowsills," he said, immediately targeting her most treasured for her feature. "Faith, what do we need them for? Do you know that such wide windowsills disturb air circulation? In other words, they waste heat from the radiator. I wouldn't be surprised if all these fancy things, these stupid windowsills, built-in cabinets and tiles, were included in the price." "That's nonsense," Faith snorted. "Everything is nonsense to you." Jack waved his hand. "Listen, honestly, I don't understand why we should buy an apartment, especially a 3-bedroom one. We'll go bankrupt on utilities alone, and we've got a mortgage to consider. Faith, let's think about this again, okay? After all, we have a place to live. What's wrong with my mother's apartment?" "Everything," Faith answered with her ready response, a conversation they'd had countless times before. "And the most important thing is that it's Mum's, you know. Not yours, not mine, not ours. Your Mum's. I can't even arrange furniture how I want. Don't you mind that we're living not just as a couple, but as 3 people? There are some inconveniences, sure, but at least we can save money instead of going into debt." Jack offered his trump card argument. Yes, the only point worth considering. Faith sighed wearily. Clearly she had a long road ahead to convince Jack to buy their apartment. And really, how could they discuss an apartment when he had made such a fuss today over something as minor as her old coat? "Jack, listen, I think I need a new coat right away." Faith studied her reflection in the mirror. Late autumn had brought freezing mornings, and despite driving to work, the October chill still crept under her coat before she could reach her car's warm interior. She needed warmer clothes if she planned to stay healthy, until she and Jack started thinking about children. She loved her spring coat that looked like a cosy grey-brown plaid, the way people love perfectly fitting clothes that become like a second skin over the years. She'd bought it long ago during a trip abroad, and it had become a faithful companion, keeping her warm on cold days, flattering her figure, and even improving her posture. It was one of her favourite possessions, but sadly all good things must end. The mirror revealed the truth clearly now. The lapels and hem were visibly frayed, and the once fine English wool, despite its quality, looked shabby. Worst of all, one of the large patch pockets near the bottom had a mortifying hole that had caused her considerable distress last year. Summer had erased the memory of the torn coat, and Faith had never developed the habit of preparing her wardrobe before each season. Consequently, she always started winter in a wrinkled down jacket, greeted autumn and spring in a creased coat, and her favourite coat typically took 2 weeks of wear to lose its storage wrinkles. Now suddenly, remembering the hole, she literally groaned at her reflection. "Look what a mess!" She slipped her hand into her pocket and wiggled her finger at the hole. "I'm terribly upset, but I can't wear this any more." "Why not? It's a fine coat." Jack suddenly spoke up. "It's English-made, not even worn out. You can't buy such quality now. It's wonderful, no doubt, but I can't walk around with a hole in the most visible place. I don't work in a vegetable garden or as a janitor. I can't show up to work looking like this." "Faith, look, you're not going to buy yourself a cheap coat, are you? I know you. You'll prefer buying an expensive and quality one, but we just don't have it right now. And you're worrying about the coat for nothing." He walked over to his wife, who was stunned into silence. "To be honest, if you hadn't told me about the hole, I wouldn't even have noticed it. It's so tiny. It's not even worth mentioning." "Tiny? No, wait!" She looked at her husband with determination. "There is a lot to discuss, Jack. I don't understand what's going on. How come I can't even buy myself a coat? Where does our money go? We work? Well, I do, anyway." "I knew it. I knew you'd give me a hard time about this. So go ahead, say I'm living off you." Jack's voice rang with resentment. The woman was frightened. "No, Jack, you misunderstood me," she mumbled guiltily. "I didn't mean to offend you at all. I realise this can happen to anyone. You're out of a job. Of course it's sad, but we're a family. We'll manage." Jack stood at the window with an expression of wounded dignity. "Well, darling, please excuse me." Faith, having hung the unfortunate coat on the rack, came up to her husband and gently pressed her head against his shoulder. "To hell with this coat. I'll wear a jacket. Besides, winter's coming soon, and I'll need to switch to a down jacket anyway." "All right, let's forget it," Jack grumbled, conciliatory. "But don't throw away your coat. It can be sewn up. Let's take it to my mother. She'll fix it. And don't spoil your mood over nonsense. By the way, whose birthday is tomorrow, huh?" He laughed and put his arm around her shoulders. "My favourite wife. Well, I need to run. I'm late. Today's a day off, but I've been offered a job opportunity. I need to meet someone. Talk to him." Jack left long ago, and Faith sat on the windowsill, lost in thoughts about herself, about her family life, which had turned out quite different from what she'd imagined in her dreams, about Jack, about his words and actions. Yet there was nothing special or unusual in her husband's words. Jack simply had one peculiarity that had distinguished him throughout his life. First from the other children, then from his school class, his university group, and finally from adults in general. Jack was a cheapskate, in the truest sense of the word. Everyone had always known it. It was as obvious as the fact that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Jack had always been that way, and for Faith it was neither a surprise nor a discovery. She had known Jack almost all her life, with a long break, of course, but practically from birth until today, sharing an apartment and a bed with him for the past 3 years. Yet they were complete opposites. Their families had lived in the same building and, within months of each other, had brought home their newborns, a boy, Jack, and a girl, Faith. Naturally, they first played in the same sandbox, then attended the same kindergarten and school. Faith occasionally participated in attempts to reform his miserly ways, though more often defended him from overzealous champions of justice. Until 6th grade, Jack had been rather frail and small, and in Faith's opinion far too loud for his size. She herself was tall and athletic, focusing on swimming, which had developed her arm and shoulder strength. She regularly used this strength to defend her neighbour from bullies who disapproved of his behaviour. Though Jack sometimes irritated her too, he received far more help than fighting from Faith. When Faith and Jack grew up, their paths diverged. Right after school, he disappeared somewhere distant, either to work or study. No one, it seemed, not even Jack's parents, knew for certain. Meanwhile, Faith attended university, earned an economics degree, and began working at a small firm. Life happened in such a way that the firm's business quickly went uphill. Turnover and profits grew, and along with all this grew Faith's career. In a few years, the hard-working, persistent, and pathologically honest young woman rose from an ordinary specialist in the accounting department to head of the economic department. Despite earning enough to buy a decent apartment, she was in no hurry to get her own place and continued living with her mother. She had no father for so long that Faith herself didn't remember if he had ever been there. Mum worked, it seemed, around the clock, frantically trying to deal with Faith and her older brother during brief breaks between her work shifts. Personal life was something she apparently didn't even think about. By the time Faith and Tucker grew up, their mother had neither strength nor desire for it. Faith, now an adult, felt too sorry for her mother to leave her alone in the quiet, empty apartment. That's why she lived in her childhood room, still covered with pink, though quite yellowed wallpaper. "Faith, you should at least change the wallpaper in your room," Mum would laugh quietly. "What for?" Faith would joke back. "I look at it and feel like a little girl." "Always sitting at home in the evenings. Look, Faith, you'll die here an old maid," her brother would tease during his occasional visits home. "Listen, let me introduce you to some of my friends." "Why not? I know some decent guys. We'll find a younger one, clean him up, give him a haircut, maybe even a shave, and get you married." "I can do without you and your friends." Faith would wave him off, but Tucker, though not meaning to offend his sister, had inadvertently touched her soul. Jokes aside, Faith's single status was indeed dragging on. Celebrating her 29th birthday, she sat before the mirror and asked herself frankly, "What is wrong with you, Faith? Why are you still alone?" The question required serious reflection because generally everything else was in order. She was healthy, educated, independent, self-confident, and with a well-paid job. At work she managed a department of 7 people. She had many friends, including her dear friend Mary. Mary insisted all men were worth nothing, declaring that women should ignore them completely and live freely, without washing socks, wiping noses, or cooking soup. Yet this passionate conviction hadn't stopped Mary herself from being a loving wife and mother to 2 charming twins for several years. "So what?" Mary would snort when Faith pointed out this contradiction. "Trust me," Mary would complain, "I haven't read a book in 5 years, even on my one day off. I can't lie quietly or take a proper bath. Within 5 minutes, someone always bursts through the door, yelling about a bursting bladder or needing something they absolutely cannot live without. Before I can even wash up." Faith would nod sympathetically at her friend's words. Of course, it seemed horrible that a woman couldn't even take a peaceful bath. Yet, when she returned home and sank into her own fragrant bubble bath, she found herself dreaming of someone knocking on the door or bursting in, demanding her attention and breaking the silence she'd grown weary of. Like many women, Faith began searching for the root of her problems in her appearance. The mirror told her honestly that she'd never be asked to model. Her nose could be shorter, her skin clearer, her hair thicker, and her eyes, especially in the morning before her beauty routine, were mere slits, far from what anyone would call beautiful. But with effort in hair and makeup, she transformed into quite a pretty young woman, with a special charm in the dimples that appeared when she smiled without hesitation. Her figure was still good, thanks to 8 years of swimming and athletic discipline. Lately, she'd noticed some concerning signs that her fitness was waning, and perhaps it was time to consider a gym membership or return to swimming, but nothing was critical yet. Not enough, at least, to be the main cause of her loneliness. Faith continued her self-examination, buying beautiful clothes she had nowhere to wear, going on solitary tourist trips where she pretended to be a traveller seeking romantic solitude, and shyly asking strangers to photograph her in front of landmarks. As a rule, the photos turned out completely ridiculous, with her twisted or clenched face and bulging eyes. However, she didn't dare, or didn't have an opportunity to retake the shot, though she wanted pictures where she looked beautiful, with her hair flowing, not tousled, and most importantly, not alone. Faith sat in her friend's kitchen, watching as Mary stirred something in a pot with one hand, while holding a phone to her ear with the other, somehow managing to scold her mumbling son with a menacing look. "Mary, how do people actually meet nowadays? Where?" she asked when Mary hung up the phone, shooed her trouble-making kid out of the kitchen. Her friend, stirring something hopelessly burnt, launched into a tirade about foolish women who, instead of living peacefully and enjoying life, were looking for a noose around their necks. A few months ago, Mary lent her friend a stunning rhinestone-studded dress and sent her to a fashionable art exhibition, where, according to her, one might meet some decent prospects. Decent prospects may have been there, but none approached Faith with marriage proposals, and she herself didn't venture beyond trivial conversations with a few acquaintances. Then came the trip to an upscale country hotel, for which Faith, internally wincing, spent enough money to fund a month-long island vacation. Given the accommodation prices, there should have been herds of eligible millionaires roaming about, and indeed one specimen with a whiskey glass did try to strike up a conversation with the lonely, bored Faith, but when she noticed the telling untanned strip on his ring finger, she promptly disappeared into her room. "Well, you could have at least talked to him. You wouldn't die over it. I'll tell you a secret. To meet a man, you actually have to respond when he speaks. Can you imagine?" Maria was furious when Faith reported the trip's 0 results. "God, how do they keep you employed, let alone in charge? You can't say a word." How could Faith explain to Mary that at work she was an entirely different person, confident, strong, understanding everything she said and did? There she was in her element. But in unfamiliar settings, especially with strange men, she turned wooden, catastrophically tongue-tied, her face growing dour as she lowered her head and began to blush inevitably. There was also that questionable night at the club with friends. The informal setting was supposed to help Faith relax and finally make a meaningful connection. Instead, she didn't know how to dance like the other club-goers did, and alcohol wasn't really her thing. After sitting stiffly until midnight, thoroughly deafened by the unusually loud and harsh music, she gratefully escaped into the fresh air. Following her failed debut as a public event star, Faith decided to take matters into her own hands and created an online dating profile. After carefully crafting her questionnaire, she waited for that special prince, who surely must be searching the internet for her, and her alone. The outcome was unexpected. She received requests for bank card details, requests for provocative photos, and a suspicious link which she regretted clicking. After that, she abandoned online dating altogether. Still alone, Faith repeatedly convinced herself that she wasn't some unwanted failure, but rather an independent, self-sufficient woman who simply hadn't met the right man yet. But late at night, after confirming her mother's TV was off, she would bury her face in her pillow, her claims of self-sufficiency and independence dissolving into tears. Then her mother joined the campaign for her daughter's happiness, attempting to introduce Faith to various men. Mother's candidates, however, were typically world-weary and rather amusing. Faith politely declined these favourable matches, prompting her mother to lament that she would die without having grandchildren to dote on, conveniently forgetting that her eldest son Tucker regularly left his 2 little rascals in her care. The only thing her mother's interference achieved was making Faith consider buying her own apartment and start coming home later, after starting her mother's favourite evening shows. The woman was an ardent fan of soap operas, so engrossed in the TV and so concerned about the fate of various Brazilian or Turkish orphans that even her own daughter's problems temporarily faded into the background. One summer evening, Faith sat on a bench near the entrance, squinting in the gentle evening sun, waiting for the sounds of passionate Brazilian arguments to drift down from the open first-floor window. "Faith? You? Well, hello!" She heard a voice above her head. In front of her stood a tall, sturdy man with an incredibly familiar face. The face was so handsome that she momentarily forgot about trying to identify him, just staring instead. His stylishly maintained stubble framed his face perfectly, harmonizing with the dark hair that fell across his forehead. He looked like he'd stepped out of a Turkish soap opera. Faith, unlike her mother, wasn't particularly fond of such shows. Still, the young man before her was as striking as any leading man from those passion-filled dramas. "Jack!" Faith gasped in amazement. "Wow, look at you! I didn't even recognize you at first. Listen, we haven't seen each other for about 8 years, right?" "Yes, longer perhaps. Probably since high school." Jack smiled. "Well, tell me, how are you doing?" Faith asked and moved over on the bench, politely making room for Jack. He sat down beside her readily. Nothing special. Nothing to brag about. I tried working in the north, but couldn't handle it. Can you imagine? It's cold there." "Really? Who would have thought?" Faith laughed freely and easily, in a way she hadn't for ages. "Yeah, I'm shocked myself." Jack joined in her laughter. They sat, talking about everything, reminiscing about their turbulent childhood. Jack even thanked Faith sincerely for her long-ago intercession, which he still remembered. "By the way, why are you still sitting here, not coming home?" Jack suddenly asked. "You still live here, right?" "Yes, I live here as I used to," she nodded. "With Mum? Are you still single?" Jack suddenly asked. Instead of telling him it was none of his business, or that such direct questions were inappropriate, Faith surprised herself by playfully shaking her head and saying, "Imagine, no one wants me." Perhaps it was because Jack was familiar, someone she'd known for so many years. Being with him felt surprisingly natural. Words that would normally never cross her mind, or at least stay stuck in her throat, flowed easily with Jack. "No one wants you? What fools!" said Jack, suddenly serious. "I would." "You're lying," Faith teased. "All you men are cheaters and liars, only able to promise a poor girl many things, and then go to the bushes." "No. Wait, Faith," Jack said with unexpected solemnity. "I'm perfectly serious. Marry me." "Jack, the North must have frozen your brain." She laughed again. What are you talking about? Well, I'm off. We have... She nodded at her apartment window. Oh, can you hear that? Carmelita's already been with Ignatia and now regrets it. It'll be a good 20 minutes, so I can eat dinner in peace, while my mum sympathises with the poor girl. Nice seeing you, Jack. Bye. She waved goodbye to her old friend and hid in the entryway. Well, look at that. Jack went from an ugly duckling to such a swan. Who would have thought? She mused before falling asleep. The next evening, after parking her car in the usual spot, she nearly walked straight into a bouquet of flowers. Looking up, she saw Jack holding gorgeous white roses. Oh, Jack, you look impossibly handsome, Faith exclaimed sincerely. Jack cut a striking figure in his white shirt with thin blue stripes and dark jeans. Are you going on a date? She continued, not waiting for his response. Ooh, I envy your date partner. Such a gentleman. Picture perfect. And these flowers, just amazing. That is to say, you envy yourself? Jack smiled. I don't understand, Faith said. The flowers are for you, and I dressed up like this to please you. If you agree, I'd like to invite you somewhere for a proper conversation. Faith, please don't refuse. She looked around, confused. This had to be some kind of trick, a prank. His friend was probably hiding nearby, ready to jump out laughing. Jack, what are you doing? Faith ventured. Nothing. I'm just inviting you to a restaurant, that's all. Jack smiled. Okay, since you're so distrustful, I'll tell you everything straight. We bumped into each other yesterday by chance. When I saw you, I suddenly realized I really like you. I guess I've always liked you. Maybe since high school. I just didn't realize it then. From school? Faith could not overcome her amazement and confusion. So you fell in love with me in high school? Huh? I wonder if it was after I hit you in the forehead with a basketball, or when the girls and I locked you in the girls' restroom. Jack sighed and said, I don't remember exactly. Maybe it was then, or maybe it was after you defended me from 3 8th graders. I don't know. Faith, you'd better say yes or no, because half the neighbours are staring out the windows at us. They settled down at a table in a small, cosy restaurant. Faith, let's go back to our conversation from yesterday, Jack suddenly suggested. Is it about you asking me to marry you? She laughed. Jack, aren't you tired of this? Maybe I should hit you again to make you come to your senses. So you don't believe me? He raised an eyebrow, well aware that it suited him terribly. Not a bit. Faith nodded vigorously, fighting Jack's charms. You, Faith, are a surprisingly down-to-earth person. He sighed. Well, how can I prove that I'm serious and really want you to marry me? Eat a napkin. Faith blurted out. Jack looked at her with sad eyes, reached out, picked up the napkin lying on the table and bringing it to his mouth, began to squeeze its edge slowly. That's it. I believe, stop it, Faith whispered, looking around and wincing with laughter. I agree. The next day, Faith sat in the kitchen and tried to explain herself to her mother. Mother, I am 29 years old. 29! And I've kissed once in my life, and that was mistakenly, someone else's mistake, because they thought I was someone else in the dark. Faith grinned and looked at her mum. Yes, it probably all looks strange from the outside. Hasty, maybe even stupid, to marry after a few hours of meeting. But what hours, Mum? I've known Jack for 29 of my 29 years. That's certainly not what you'd call a hasty acquaintance, is it? What does it have to do with how long you've known him? Mum looked at her daughter more seriously than ever. "How can you marry without love, without real feeling? It's not right, my daughter." "I don't know how wrong it is, Mum, but I'm tired of being alone. And Jack is the only man who's interested in me, genuinely interested, and I can feel it. I know him like the back of my hand. He can't fool me. But seriously, Mum, I like him a lot." A few months later, Jack and Faith married, to the amazement of the whole neighbourhood. "Well," laughed the neighbours, "now we believe in the saying, 'First comes fighting, then comes love.' They used to scuffle on the playground so terribly." To Faith's surprise, who had planned to discuss buying a separate apartment before the wedding, Jack suddenly said, "Faith, listen. Let's not rush this, eh? This is a serious matter. We shouldn't make hasty decisions. Let's save up some more money. I want to contribute my share too. I'm not a freeloader after all." That sounded reasonable and honourable. Besides, it turned out that Jack didn't mind sharing the apartment with Faith's mother. She suddenly threw herself into taking care of the young family, rediscovered her culinary skills, and began spoiling the children, as she called them, with masterpieces of home cooking. Jack quickly found work at a respectable firm as a sales representative, and, being naturally charming and sociable, began earning good money. On their wedding anniversary, Faith surprised them with a trip to the Spanish coast. But she had to convince Jack to accept it, because the visa and trip were already paid for, tickets bought and suitcases packed. "How could you?" he protested. "No, Faith, you can't do this. You didn't even consult me." "Of course I didn't consult you. I knew you'd never agree." Faith laughed. "Of course I wouldn't. Such money!" exclaimed Jack. "Jack, don't be angry. Let it be our gift to ourselves for the first anniversary." Faith hugged her husband and silently praised herself for downplaying the trip's cost when she'd told Jack. "Perhaps if he knew the full amount, he'd divorce me immediately," she thought jokingly. But soon it became difficult for her to pull such tricks, because Jack firmly took control of their family finances. He invested money at interest, transferred funds to a joint account, and even handled the grocery shopping and household items. "Oh, Faith, you're hopeless with money," he explained. "All you want to do is rush through the store as quickly as possible. You're always filling the cart with expensive items, and you shop at the priciest store just because it's on your way home. We'll never save anything that way, my dear." Faith shrugged and felt only grateful that she didn't have to go shopping anymore. A couple of years passed. Now she had a man by her side who, though sometimes behaving like the famous Scrooge McDuck, was gentle, attentive, caring. He always tucked in her blanket, made tea with lemon, and bought her favourite apples. But all that paled in comparison to what mattered most. She was no longer alone. Then Jack lost his job. His firm suddenly went bankrupt and let all employees go. "Should I accept a lower-paying position?" he asked his wife. "I don't want to lower our standard of living, but a job like my own one won't be easy to find." "Jack, dear," Faith exclaimed, "no one's saying you should take the first offer. Take your time, look around, compare options. We're not starving. We have money, clothes, shoes. I'm earning enough, so please don't worry." "All right then, it's settled. I'll look for a proper position while you support us both." Jack nodded calmly and turned on the TV. Perhaps it was at that moment that Faith first felt a sense of injustice. She was working like a horse, even taking on extra reports, something she'd never done before, while patching holes in her tights with nail polish. She was technically the head of the family, at least measured by income, Yet here she was, reassuring Jack not to worry, while he graciously agreed. Catching herself thinking this way, she scolded herself. "You've been quite awful, Faith. Jack's in a tough spot, and here you are counting who owns what. Some loving and faithful wife you are." Jack's unemployment stretched on. He'd disappear all day and return with a guilty, charming smile. He'd joke about tightening their belts and tell Faith not to get upset if the apartment she chose would be sold. Months passed this way, and now here she was, Faith, a happy wife and highly paid professional, sitting on the windowsill wondering how to work in a coat with holes. Her thoughts returned to that unfortunate coat. She could check if the hole could be fixed. Maybe she could visit her mother or Jack's mother to repair it. She could always hide that cursed hole by her purse. With a sigh, Faith slid off the windowsill and trudged to the coat rack where her favourite but worn-out coat hung. Running her palm over it, she suddenly felt something hard underneath. Pushing her coat aside, she found Jack's light jacket. Something long and rectangular bulged from the zippered pocket, stretching the thin raincoat fabric taut against its sharp corners. Faith gently pressed the fabric against the box and froze. Through the translucent material, she clearly saw the familiar name of the jewellery company. She knew exactly what kind of jewellery they sold and how much it cost. "Wow!" Faith thought in amazement, sinking into the sofa. So Jack was planning to give her an outrageously expensive birthday present. Given the box size, it couldn't be a ring, though even their rings cost a fortune. "It's probably a bracelet or something massive. It must be insanely expensive," and I reproached him, thinking he's a cheapskate because of this stupid coat. He might have been saving up for a year for this gift, putting it off, worrying. The woman thought and laughed happily, leaning back on the sofa. "Faith, dear, happy birthday," she heard the next morning. She barely opened her eyes, as usual on weekends, and stared at her husband, confused. Jack, radiant and almost dressed to leave, stood in the doorway. "Are you leaving?" she asked, trying to fully wake up. "Today's a day off." "Well, it's a day off for you, hard workers. For us unemployed lazybones, the day of the week doesn't matter." Jack smiled. "Seriously, Faith, I have to leave. Another conversation about a possible job. But I'll definitely be home tonight. Cake, wine, everything. Oh, I almost forgot the most important thing. Happy birthday, darling." He leaned over and kissed her cheek. "Here's a little present from me. Sorry it's modest, but such are the times." Faith stared at the red paper-wrapped package. The paper was suspiciously similar to the one she had used for Jack's last present. It was, but that wasn't the point. What she held in her hands, neither in shape nor size, resembled anything like a jewellery case from a famous firm. "Is this for me?" she asked, confused. "Of course." Jack nodded happily. "And what's in your pocket? Who's that for?" Faith almost said it, then bit her tongue. "Thank you, sweetie. I'll see you tonight." Jack kissed her cheek once more and left. Faith gazed thoughtfully at the gift from her beloved and loving husband. It was a rather gaudy large mug with a drawing and inscription on the side. Her name, Faith, was written between curlicues, with the full added at the bottom in smaller print. Yes, she was Faithful Faith. Faith grinned, picked up a black marker, and added the word fool. It turned out beautifully and meaningfully. The jewellery case was no longer in the apartment. She checked everywhere, despite how disgusted she felt at that moment. Jack came from a simple, ordinary family. His mother had worked for years in the district polyclinic's registry office. She was a kind, quiet woman with clear eyes. She loved her Jack, her late and only child. She would rush home during breaks to warm up his lunch, ensure he wore his hat and scarf to training, and in the evenings, despite being tired and cold, and algebraic functions, Jack loved his mother and respected her. Yes, this didn't stop him from wrapping her around his finger, almost literally. Jack's father, who believed in stricter methods of raising a real man, rarely had the chance to implement these methods. As a truck driver making long-distance trips across the country, he was often away from home for weeks. During those brief periods when the man came home, he had little influence on his son's upbringing, though he tried. Believing devoutly in the miraculous properties of gymnastics and contrast showers, he would mercilessly wake the unfortunate adolescent for morning routines. His educational system also included daily homework checks, mandatory household chores, and, peculiarly, reading classical fiction, though his father himself only ever read one book, as far as Jack could tell, the Handbook of Amateur Fishermen. But there was no point arguing. The boy would mentally count the days his father would be home and sigh miserably. Kicking aside the hated heavy dumbbell, he'd skip his evening neighbourhood run and brace himself for his father's inevitable shouting about his D grades. "Only a complete moron can get a D in such a subject." He'd hear his father's voice in advance in his mind. These conversations between father and son happened regularly, with only the tone and subject name changing. "How can anyone possibly get a 2 in geography?" "Easily," Jack would mutter in reply in his defence. Sometimes he emerged from these arguments, if not victorious. Then, at least feeling he'd gotten some revenge. "All right," said his father eagerly. "Let's see. What's your geography D for?" "Well, for the capitals of European countries," Jack reluctantly confessed. "Oh, God, Europe? Not even Africa?" marvelled his father. "Did you hear, Nina? What kind of fool are you nurturing here? He doesn't even know the capitals of European countries. Everyone knows that." "Really?" Jack grinned wickedly and vindictively. "Well, if everyone knows, then tell me the capital of Lithuania." "Tallinn." "What? No." "What do you mean, no? Why are you making faces at me?" The man looked at his son, his wicked smile faltering as he began to hesitate. Actually, wait, no, not Tallinn. Riga. Yeah, definitely Riga." "Again, no," the boy said triumphantly. "Wait." The self-proclaimed home educator and geography expert sputtered. "What have we got there? Tallinn, Riga, and what's its name? Well, the third city. Always forget it. Damn. What is it, Nina?" "Well, you don't know, but you say everyone knows," Jack stubbornly countered. His father looked at his son in confused anger and resorted to the classic parental defence. "So what? I'm near retirement. How many years ago did I learn this? I could have forgotten, but you learn it now, and then it just slips your mind." Then finally his father would pack up and leave for another trip, and Jack would exhale with relief. The dumbbells were shoved under the closet again, books arranged on the shelves, and lessons postponed until after playing outside. This mix of maternal and paternal upbringing resulted in Jack growing up fairly normal, though spoiled. When his unusual, almost pathological greed first appeared is difficult to pinpoint. In kindergarten, little Jack took toys from other children, but almost all children do that. What set him apart was his habit of smuggling these toys home, hidden in his pants or under his coat, despite his teacher's warnings and his mother's gentle reproaches. As Jack grew older, he discovered that his compulsion to possess everything he wanted didn't sit well with others. In fact, they disliked it so much that he got beaten up in the yard a few times for trying to take others' bikes or cars. The nickname Selfish Piggy, given by the other children, stung, and he resolved to change. But his peers either didn't notice his efforts or didn't believe them, and he never formed any close friendships during his school years. Only Faith, a long-nosed tomboy from the second entrance, with broad shoulders, inexplicably sympathized with him and helped him through difficult times. His education was more an ordeal than a journey. Even with his aging father, who had stopped taking long trips and was home more often, yelling at him more frequently, things didn't improve. Though, perhaps thanks to this peculiar form of attention to his academic performance, Jack managed to get C's with B's in an even way. After school, Jack fled from his father, whose moral lectures had become unbearable in his old age, and from his mother, whose kindness and well-meaning but futile guidance suffocated him. After all, what good were $20 and homemade cutlets when he craved thousands and fine dining? The only inheritance he claimed was bitterness toward his parents, who remained in their shabby two-bedroom apartment, having neither earned nor saved anything. Why have a child at all without the desire, intelligence or means to give them a better life than your own? He often thought. He enrolled in not very popular and low-ranged college, but quickly realized that memorizing facts, sitting through lectures and mingling with penniless classmates held no appeal. However, among his notably attractive classmates, a promising prospect emerged. A wealthy man's daughter, who surprisingly responded quickly to his attention. So quickly, in fact, that they soon found themselves in bed together. Soon she suddenly claimed rights to him, prattling about marriage and meeting her father. But Jack mysteriously lost interest in her and had to diplomatically explain that she had mistaken his attentions and he had no desire for a lifelong commitment. The girl seemed to understand everything but was clearly offended. That's why Jack didn't take any risks and fled as far from his hometown as possible. Thus, he ended up in the far north. Jack, feeling safe at last, settled in a small, perpetually frozen town, where summer's arrival was marked only by the sun refusing to set below the horizon. He survived for a few years, working as a labourer at a processing plant, living in a rented room and practising his masculine charms on the unsophisticated local ladies. But eventually he grew bored. The cold never became familiar, even after several years. Each winter Jack marvelled at the thermometer readings and his body's ever-creative responses to the frost. His organism, as he called it, never repeated the same reaction twice. During his first polar winter, Jack's fingers froze. In his second, it was his ears. He grew weary of the hard, dirty work that left every joint, ligament and bone aching. The mosquitoes tormented him in summer, leaving not mere marks, but holes in his skin so deep he felt he could peer inside himself. The local people remained strange and distant. Their constant smiling and shoulder-slapping struck him as foolish, as if they were pretending to be happy instead of admitting that life in this cursed land was unbearable, and they were all there out of desperation. And then there was the endless poverty. Despite decent wages and Jack's characteristic frugality, it wasn't what he'd dreamed of. He soon realized he wouldn't earn the money he needed here, even if he sacrificed all his extremities to the north. So he decided to return to his hometown, come what may. His first option was his parents' apartment. His retired father had grown insufferable over the years. Sometimes Jack felt the old man might slam his fist on the table any moment and yell, "What did you get in geography today, you bum? Show me your diary." His mother, also aged, was so overjoyed at his return that she seemed slightly unhinged. How else to explain the morning milk porridge and the ghastly, coloured shaggy sweater she began knitting for his winter wear? Jack endured it all while contemplating his next move. No profession, no job, no family, no housing, not even friends. A perfect situation for his approaching 30th birthday. "Mum, Mum!" Jack stood at the window, leaning against the frame and fidgeting with the curtain's edge, looking down into the yard. "Mum, who's that? The one with the white car pulling out. Is that Faith?" His mother joined him at the window. "Yes, that's Faith." "The latest model car?" Jack muttered under his breath. Then, louder, "Why is she around here? Visiting her mother?" "Visiting? No, she lives here just like before," the mother said. "Here?" Jack raised his eyebrows. "In the same apartment as her mother?" "Why not, if they're comfortable?" "It's not about comfort, Mum," Jack grinned. "It's just that at our age, parents can sometimes get in the way. Pardon my frankness." "Well, nobody interferes with Faith," his mother replied, slightly irritated. "What's wrong with you, son? You're so difficult to understand. Our Faith hasn't developed a personal life yet. She lives here with her mother, and honestly, I think she's afraid to leave her alone. The poor woman has been having heart problems lately. She's—" "Listen, Mum," Jack cut her off, uninterested in the elderly neighbour's ailments, but eager to learn more about the young woman with the fancy car. "So you're saying Faith lives with her mother? Has she never been married?" "No, and I don't understand why. Faith was always such a nice girl, and now she's pretty, independent, earns good money." "Earns?" Jack asked, trying to mask his keen interest. "Yes, imagine. Faith's such a clever girl. She's achieved everything on her own. Her mother told me she's the head of finance at a big firm. You know it. We even have their advertisement in front of our market." Jack nodded seriously. The company name on the billboard his mother mentioned was well known to him. It wasn't just big, it was enormous. And now it turned out that their Faith was practically the chief financial officer. The conversation grew more intriguing. "Why doesn't she buy her own apartment, if she earns good money?" Jack asked. "I've already explained." Mum threw up her hands in frustration. "She doesn't want to leave her mother alone. It's no picnic living by yourself. Though her mother mentioned that she has savings for an apartment. God willing, everything will work out for our girl, and a good man will be found. Do you remember her brother Tucker? He already has 2 boys. The mother continued to say something, but Jack didn't listen to her. He already knew everything he needed to know. Faith continued to live with her mother, and to all appearances, she had no one. Well, seriously, anyway. She has money, and it looks like a lot of money. Just look at the kind of car she drives. No, he wasn't exactly self-serving to the core. He really liked her, and it wasn't his fault that this pretty young woman was also wealthy. It was just a coincidence. Why should he, Jack, be embarrassed about anything? Faith had grown up quite handsome during these years, while he was in the north. She had stopped wearing stretchy jeans and T-shirts. Instead, she had moved into strict, stylish pantsuits that fit her perfectly. Her once perpetually wet, pool-damaged hair that used to be carelessly twisted at the back of her head was now worn long and blonde just below the shoulders, thick and shiny. In general, Faith had blossomed into, if not a beauty, then at least quite an attractive young woman. Yet there was still some insecurity about her, a shyness, as if she was constantly apologizing for her presence. It was strange, but it was striking even to him as he watched his old acquaintance from the second-floor window. The strategic plan was clear, and after catching up with Faith, one evening as she sat on a bench, he began to put it into practice. The watch on her wrist and the obviously diamond earrings only confirmed the correctness of his actions. Marry this girl. Faith, save up money, lots of it, and buy a really decent apartment, or better yet, a house, so that there would be something to share in a divorce, if it came to that. And really, how bad could it be? The main thing was to get out and not return to his crazy father and mother with her prickly wool-green sweater. That's what he thought at the time, and it all worked out. He'd lived 3 great years on Faith's money. Honestly, let them not believe him, but he would have lived like that forever. Perhaps over time he would have truly grown attached to Faith and begun to feel real tenderness for this naive and kind simpleton, beyond mere gratitude. And from there, love wouldn't be far behind. Perhaps they would even buy that very apartment with the ridiculous oversized windowsills, and they'd have a child, or even 2, and live happily ever after. Why not? But then Veronica came along, and everything went to hell. Beautiful, demanding, determined. She suppressed him, enslaved him, completely subjugated him to her will, and on Faith's birthday he couldn't refuse to see her, either. He could never refuse her anything at all, especially since it was a great occasion. He could finally give Veronica something worthy of her, an absolutely stunning bracelet. But he came home like a fool, regretting to wipe the lipstick off his face, or rather, without even thinking about it. "Please, pack up and leave," Faith said. There was no cake, no salads, no wine on the table. There was only a mug, which he had bought at the last moment at the nearest kiosk. Jack didn't argue, or prove anything, or explain himself. After all, it was just another D that life had given him. Faith walked out of the store, breathed in the fresh autumn air with pleasure, and shrugged. It was warm and cosy. Her hands slipped into the large, deep pockets and felt the soft, slightly fleecy woolen surface beneath with pleasure. This wonderful, just-bought coat sat on her figure perfectly, as if moulded to her, and even seemed to whisper in her ear, gently caressing her face. "Take it, you must take it. Don't doubt it. We'll be excellent together, I promise. I'm sorry, but what a wonderful smile you have. Just please move away from the edge of the sidewalk before someone splashes mud on you." She heard a soft male voice. A tall, dark-haired man stood nearby, looking at her with admiration. "Your new coat suits you remarkably well, and if I were a little more brazen, I'd have the courage to invite you for a cup of coffee." "How do you know it's new?" she asked, smiling happily for some reason. "Well, it's just that you have—" He awkwardly pointed behind her back, as if embarrassed. Faith reached up and fumbled for the cardboard label dangling behind her collar and laughed loudly, cheerfully, freely.